What could make a woman walk past an entire town and ask the one cowboy everyone feared to become her husband? A pen clattered onto the auction table. Cold wind whipped dust across the street. Odessa's fingers trembled as she stepped through the silent crowd and stopped in front of Wade Holloway. Dozens of eyes followed her. No one spoke. Even the horses seemed still. Then she lifted her chin and asked a question that made the entire town freeze in place. If you enjoy unforgettable Western love stories, stay with us and tell us where you're watching from. The wind carried dust down Main Street, as if the valley itself had decided to turn its face away from Silver Junction. Odessa Freeman stood near the hitching rail outside Vernon Pike's bank and watched a loose sheet of paper tumble across the road. It snagged against a wagon wheel and stayed there, fluttering helplessly. A lot like her future. The drought had taken nearly everything. The corn never reached full height. The pasture dried early. 2 calves died before summer ended. Then the bank notices started arriving, one after another, folded neatly, always polite, always final. Her younger brother Isaac stood beside her, hat pulled low, shoulders tight. "You don't have to stay for this," he said. Odessa kept her eyes on the crowd gathering near the bank steps. "Yes, I do." Men she had known since childhood avoided looking at her. A few had once shared coffee with her father. A few had borrowed tools from him. One man had even stood beside his grave. Today, none of them stepped forward. The auction table had already been set up. A clerk arranged papers while Vernon Pike inspected them with clean white gloves. He looked more like a senator than a banker. Not a speck of dust touched his black coat, not even out here. The town gathered slowly. Store owners, ranchers, church families, curious children. People came because bad news was free entertainment. Isaac shifted beside her. "We can leave. And go where?" He didn't answer. Neither could she. The ranch was all they had left. The little house, the barn, the wind-bent cottonwood tree near the creek. Everything their father had spent his life building. Vernon Pike cleared his throat. The crowd quieted. "Due to unpaid debt obligations," he announced, "the Freeman property will be returned to the bank today." Returned, as if it had ever belonged to him. Odessa felt her jaw tighten. She looked across the crowd and saw him. Wade Holloway, standing alone near the water trough. Like always. No one stood close to Wade. No one ever did. The feared cowboy wore a faded brown coat and an old hat bleached by years of Montana sun. His hands rested loosely at his sides. Still. Silent. Watching. People whispered about him constantly. Some claimed he'd killed a man. Others claimed he'd nearly killed 3. No one seemed to know the truth, only that Wade Holloway lived high on the ridge and preferred cattle to company. Vernon reached for a pen. The clerk slid the foreclosure papers forward. Isaac lowered his head. Odessa heard him exhale. A tired sound. Too tired for a 16-year-old boy. Something inside her settled. Not fear, not courage, just certainty. She stepped forward. One step, then another. Conversations stopped. People turned. Vernon paused. Odessa walked directly through the center of the crowd, past the auction table, past the bank steps, past every person who had already decided her story was over. She stopped in front of Wade Holloway. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rattled a sign somewhere across the street. A horse snorted. Someone coughed. Wade looked down at her. His face gave nothing away. No surprise. No amusement. Nothing. Odessa lifted her chin. "Will you marry me?" The town froze. A bottle slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the dirt. Nobody seemed to notice. Even Vernon Pike stared. Isaac looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. The silence stretched, long enough for Odessa to wonder if she'd finally lost her mind. Wade studied her. Not her dress, not her face, her eyes, as if searching for something. Then he spoke. 4 words. Quiet enough that people leaned forward to hear. "Only if you mean it." A murmur swept through the crowd. Shock rolled down Main Street faster than a prairie fire. Odessa never looked away. "I do." Another silence. Wade nodded once. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Then yes, the crowd erupted. Questions, gasps, whispers. Isaac grabbed the brim of his hat. Vernon Pike's expression hardened for the first time all morning. Odessa noticed, and for the first time that day, she felt him lose control of the room. Not much, just enough. Wade stepped beside her, not touching, not claiming, just standing there. The way a fence stands against the wind. Steady, unmoving. Vernon forced a smile. "This is highly unusual." "Seems straightforward to me," Wade replied. The banker looked as though he'd swallowed something bitter. Around them, the town buzzed with disbelief. The most feared cowboy in Granite Ridge Valley had just agreed to marry the woman everyone thought had already lost everything. Nobody understood why. Truthfully, neither did Odessa, not completely. But when she glanced toward Wade, she saw something unexpected. Not pity, not obligation, not even curiosity. Just a quiet certainty that somehow matched her own. The foreclosure papers remained unsigned on the table. The wind caught one corner and lifted it slightly. For the first time in months, Odessa Freeman could see a road ahead. She had no idea where it led, only that the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days later, a wagon creaked slowly up the winding road toward Granite Ridge. The road climbed through rolling grasslands scattered with sagebrush and weathered stone. To the west, the mountains stood dark against a pale autumn sky. Thin clouds drifted across the peaks. Odessa sat beside Isaac on the wagon bench. Neither spoke much. Everything they owned fit into the wagon behind them. A few trunks, tools, blankets, their mother's old clock wrapped in burlap. The farther they traveled from Silver Junction, the quieter the world became. At last Isaac pointed ahead. There. The ranch appeared gradually. A long fence line, a red barn that needed paint, a windmill turning lazily above a water tank, and beyond it all, a large wooden house sitting against the slope of the ridge. Not grand, not wealthy, just stubborn, like it had survived many winters by refusing to fall down. Odessa studied it. This was not what she expected. The stories about Wade Holloway had painted a different picture. A rich recluse, a feared cattle king, a man sitting on piles of money while the valley whispered about him. Instead, she saw loose boards on a corral gate, a roof patched in 3 different places, a wagon wheel leaning against the barn waiting for repairs. The place looked honest, tired, used. Wade emerged from the barn carrying a bucket. He set it down when the wagon stopped. "Road treat you all right?" Isaac climbed down first. "Mostly." Wade nodded. "Guest room's ready." "We're not guests," Odessa said. His eyes met hers briefly. "No, I suppose you're not." There was no awkward smile, no attempt at charm, just simple truth. Together they unloaded the wagon. By sunset, the trunks had been carried upstairs. The small room at the end of the hall belonged to Isaac. Odessa's room faced the valley. Wade's room remained at the opposite end of the house. The arrangement seemed carefully planned, respectful, distant. That evening, they ate beef stew at a scarred oak table in the kitchen. The only sounds were spoons against bowls and the ticking of a clock near the stove. Outside, wind rattled the porch screen. Isaac finally broke the silence. "You always eat this quiet?" Wade shrugged. "Usually." Isaac looked miserable. Odessa kicked him lightly beneath the table. The boy returned to his stew. After dinner, Wade carried his plate to the sink. No expectation, no orders, no demands. Just work. The next morning, Odessa rode into Silver Junction for supplies. The change in the town was immediate. At the feed store, a sack of seed cost nearly twice what it had cost last month. At the supply counter, a man suddenly claimed there were no deliveries available for Granite Ridge. At another shop, a merchant refused to meet her eyes at all. Everywhere she went, conversations lowered when she entered. Doors closed, smiles disappeared. By noon, she sat alone outside Ruth Callahan's grocery, holding a folded receipt and a growing sense of anger. Ruth stepped outside carrying a crate of apples. She was a woman in her 50s with sleeves rolled above her elbows and flour on her apron. "They charging you extra?" Odessa looked up. "You noticed." "Whole town noticed." Ruth sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ruth handed her a red apple. "No charge." Odessa accepted it. "Thank you." Ruth glanced toward the bank. "Folks around here don't like surprises." And marrying Wade Holloway was a surprise. Biggest one in 20 years. Odessa almost smiled. Almost. Back at the ranch, she found Isaac standing near the corral. 3 local boys rode away laughing on horseback. Isaac stared at the dirt. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Isaac." He kicked a stone. "They said I should start practicing being a mountain ghost." Odessa knew exactly what that meant. Wade's reputation, their marriage, the whispers, everything. That night she found Wade repairing harness leather under a lantern in the barn. "You know they're treating us like we're contagious." The needle stopped moving. "I know. And you're just going to ignore it?" He resumed stitching. "People get tired eventually. Or they get worse." He said nothing. That silence irritated her more than any argument could have. She turned and walked out before she said something she'd regret. Several days passed. Cold weather settled over the valley. Frost appeared each morning. One afternoon, Odessa rode into town again. As she passed the church, she noticed something strange. An elderly widow named Mrs. Harper leaving the post office. The woman opened an envelope and immediately began crying. Not from sadness, relief. She held a money order tightly against her chest. Later that week, Odessa saw another family receiving similar help. Then another, always anonymous, always arriving just before a bill came due. Curiosity got the better of her. One evening, she was organizing receipts in the kitchen when she opened the wrong drawer. Inside lay a stack of duplicate money order stubs, dozens of them. Different names, different families, same handwriting, Wade's. She stared at the papers. Mrs. Harper, the Dawson family, old Mr. Greeley, people all over the valley, quiet gifts, no signatures, no credit, no recognition. The front door opened. Wade stepped inside carrying firewood. He immediately saw the papers. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncomfortable. Odessa held up one of the stubs. "You've been helping them." He placed the wood beside the stove. "They needed it." "Why doesn't anyone know?" He shrugged. Wasn't trying to impress anybody. The answer landed harder than she expected. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows. Inside, the room grew quiet. Odessa looked at the man the valley feared, the man everyone called dangerous, and for the first time, she began to wonder whether Silver Junction had been wrong about him all along. Winter arrived early in Granite Ridge Valley. One morning, Odessa opened the front door and found the world covered in white. Snow stretched across the fields. Fence posts stood like dark markers against the frozen ground. The windmill groaned slowly under a sky the color of old tin. Life became smaller after that. Shorter days, longer nights, coffee before dawn, wood carried in by armfuls, boots drying near the stove. Wade spent most mornings checking cattle before the weather turned worse. Isaac helped where he could. Odessa kept the house running and learned more about ranch life than she had ever expected. For a few weeks, things felt almost peaceful. Then the trouble started. The first sign came on a bitter morning in December. Wade returned from the south pasture before sunrise. Snow clung to his coat. His expression was hard. The hay shed's been broken into. Odessa looked up from the stove. What was taken? Nothing. That made less sense. When they rode out later, she saw it herself. The lock hung twisted. Several tools had been thrown into the snow. Nothing stolen, only damaged, only disturbed, like someone wanted them to know they had been there. A week later, 3 calves disappeared. The tracks vanished near a rocky creek bed where the wind had erased everything. Silver Junction immediately began talking. Odessa heard it at Ruth Callahan's store. People lowered their voices when she entered. Not low enough. Wade Holloway's stirring trouble again. Wouldn't be the first time. He always was dangerous. She carried her supplies back to the wagon without saying a word. But she remembered every sentence. The worst came 3 nights before Christmas. A storm rolled over the valley after midnight. Wind hammered the house. Snow rattled against the windows. Odessa woke to shouting. She threw on a coat and rushed outside. Lantern light danced across the yard. Isaac was standing near the corral, pale and shaken. One of the horses was running loose through the snow. What happened? Isaac swallowed hard. I went to check the gate. His voice trembled. The bridle strap had been cut. Wade caught the frightened horse and brought it under control. No anger. No panic. Just steady movements. The kind that came from years of hard winters. Later, inside the kitchen, Isaac wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee. If I'd mounted him first. He didn't finish. Nobody needed him to. Silence settled over the room. The clock ticked. The stove popped softly. Outside, snow continued falling. The next day, the rumors grew louder. By afternoon, Odessa heard another story. A darker one. One she had never heard before. According to several ranchers, Wade Holloway had once been involved in a land dispute years earlier. A man had died afterward. Nobody could agree on details. Some claimed it was an accident. Others claimed Wade was responsible. The facts changed with every telling. Only the suspicion remained. That night, Odessa found Wade repairing a fence latch in the barn. The lantern light carved deep shadows across the wooden walls. She stood quietly for a moment, then asked, "Did someone die because of you?" The hammer stopped moving. For several seconds, he said nothing. When he finally looked up, his eyes were tired rather than angry. "A man died." Odessa waited. "I didn't kill him." That was all. No explanation, no defense, no argument, just those words. Something about the answer bothered her. Not because she thought he was lying, because he seemed unwilling to fight for himself, as though he'd spent years carrying accusations he no longer cared to answer. The uncertainty followed her into the new year. And then another mystery appeared. One afternoon, she climbed into the attic of the old Freeman house. The property still belonged to the bank on paper, but Vernon Pike had allowed them temporary access to collect remaining belongings. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. Boxes sat untouched for years. Old ledgers, tax receipts, seed orders, letters. Odessa spent hours sorting through them. Then she found something strange. A legal notice, folded inside a ledger. Her father's name appeared at the top. Beneath it, Vernon Pike, a lawsuit, years before his death. Odessa read it twice, then a third time. Her father had accused Vernon of fraudulent land records. The case had never gone to trial. There should have been dozens of supporting documents, witness statements, survey maps, correspondence. Instead, there was nothing. Every supporting file was missing. Gone. As if someone had removed them deliberately. That evening, she carried the paper to Eli Carter. The old ranch hand lived in a weather-beaten cabin beside the river. He studied the document for a long time, then slowly removed his spectacles. I hoped I'd never see that again. Odessa's pulse quickened. You knew about it? Eli stared toward the frozen river outside his window. The night your father died. His voice dropped. There was a fire at the grain warehouse. The room seemed smaller suddenly, colder. Eli folded the paper carefully, then met her eyes. Your father wasn't alone that night. Odessa leaned forward. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, the old man said the words that would change everything. Vernon Pike was the last man seen leaving that warehouse before the fire started. And suddenly, the snow-covered valley outside no longer felt quiet at all. Odessa left Eli Carter's cabin after dark. The snow squeaked beneath her boots. A hard winter moon hung above Granite Ridge. Every shadow seemed longer than before. Every silence felt like it was hiding something. When she reached the ranch, a lantern still glowed in the kitchen window. Wade was waiting, not pacing, not questioning, just sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He looked up when she entered. You were gone a while. Odessa removed her gloves slowly. Then she placed the old legal notice on the table. Wade read it without speaking. His eyes moved from the document to her face, then back again. Eli told me something. She told him everything. About the lawsuit. About the missing records. About Vernon being seen at the warehouse the night her father died. The room grew quiet when she finished. Only the stove crackled. Only the clock continued its steady ticking. Wade leaned back in his chair. That explains why someone wants those papers gone. You believe me? His expression barely changed. I believe somebody's scared. The next morning they rode together into the valley. The temperature sat well below freezing. Their horses breathed clouds into the pale air. Neither talked much. The landscape did most of the talking. Snow-covered fences, frozen creeks, empty pastures stretching beneath gray skies. Their first stop was the county records office, a single-room building behind the sheriff's office. Dust covered everything. Old maps, land surveys, tax ledgers, receipts stacked inside wooden cabinets. The clerk searched for nearly an hour. Nothing. Every document connected to the lawsuit had vanished. Not misplaced. Removed. Even the filing references were missing, as though someone had carefully erased them years ago. Outside the building, Odessa stood in the snow. For the first time, she felt something beyond grief. Anger. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous. Wade noticed. He didn't tell her to calm down. Didn't tell her to let it go. He simply stood beside her, the way he always did. Steady. Present. That afternoon, they rode to 3 neighboring ranches. 2 owners refused to talk. The third shut his door the moment Vernon Pike's name was mentioned. By sunset, they had learned almost nothing. Yet somehow Odessa felt less alone, because Wade stayed beside her through every closed door, every awkward silence, every disappointment. Days passed. Then another incident occurred. One morning, someone scattered nails across the road leading to the ranch. Another night, a window in the barn was broken. A week later, Isaac discovered fresh boot prints circling the house after midnight. The message was obvious. Leave. Odessa said it aloud one evening. They aren't trying to hurt you. Wade looked up from the harness he was repairing. They're trying to scare me. The room fell silent, because both of them knew she was right. The sabotage had started only after she began asking questions, only after the lawsuit resurfaced, only after old memories were disturbed. A storm rolled through 3 nights later. Wind slammed against the walls. Snow drifted against the porch steps. Around midnight, Wade heard something outside. By the time they reached the barn, the intruder was gone, but not before leaving a warning. A burned scrap of paper pinned to the door. No words, just blackened edges. A reminder of fire. A reminder of her father. Odessa stared at it. Wade removed the paper quietly, then tossed it into the snow. Enough. The next morning he rode into Silver Junction, alone. Odessa didn't know where he was going, only that he looked different when he left. More determined, less willing to tolerate silence. By noon, half the town had gathered near the square. Word spread quickly whenever Wade Holloway appeared in public, especially after years of avoiding crowds. Odessa arrived just in time. She found him standing near the water trough, where everything had begun months earlier. Storekeepers watched from doorways. Ranchers stood along the boardwalk. Even Reverend Amos Reed paused outside the church. Nobody spoke. Wade removed his gloves, looked across the crowd, then spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. If anybody has business with Odessa Freeman, he paused. The wind carried snow across the street. They can bring it to me. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. His eyes settled briefly on Vernon Pike standing near the bank entrance. If anybody wants her gone. The silence deepened. They'll have to go through me first. The entire square froze. Odessa felt every face turn toward her. She also saw something else. For the first time, Vernon Pike looked uncertain. Only for a moment. But it was there. A crack in the confidence. A crack in the mask. That evening, after darkness settled over the valley, Odessa returned to the old attic of the Freeman house. She searched until her hands were numb. Box after box, ledger after ledger, dust, receipts, canceled checks. Then finally, a false bottom inside an old trunk, hidden beneath folded blankets, a leather-bound account book. Her father's handwriting filled every page. Names, dates, land transactions, amounts paid, amounts stolen, property transfers that never should have happened, and again, and again, and again, always leading back to one man. Vernon Pike. Near the final pages, she found something else. A note, short, written only weeks before the fire. If anything happens to me, Vernon knows why. Odessa sat perfectly still. The house creaked around her. Outside, winter wind swept across the valley. Below her, Silver Junction slept peacefully, unaware that one old ledger had just turned suspicion into something far more dangerous. Proof. Odessa barely slept that night. The ledger remained on the kitchen table. A single lantern burned beside it until dawn. Every few hours, she found herself opening it again, reading the same pages, the same names, the same transactions, the same pattern. Farm after farm, family after family. Land changing hands after missed payments, suspicious debts, and sudden disasters. Always ending with Vernon Pike owning more. By sunrise, frost coated the windows. Wade sat across from her, studying the final pages. Neither needed to say what both already understood. The ledger could destroy Vernon, which meant Vernon would destroy it if given the chance. Snow began falling before noon. Heavy, steady, the kind of storm old ranchers respected, the kind that erased roads and buried fences. Sheriff Ben Turner arrived shortly after midday. His coat carried a layer of white powder. His horse looked exhausted. Odessa handed him the ledger. Ben read quietly. His jaw tightened. When he reached her father's note, he closed the book and stared toward the window. "I'll need witnesses." "We have Eli," Odessa said. Ben nodded. "Maybe more." The sheriff left before sunset. The storm worsened. Wind swept across Granite Ridge Valley with a low, mournful sound. Inside the ranch house, Isaac checked the locks twice. Wade loaded extra wood beside the stove. Nobody mentioned fear, but everyone felt it. Near midnight, the dogs started barking. Wade was already moving before the second bark. He opened the front door. Snow rushed inside. Through the blowing white darkness, lantern lights appeared, several of them, moving across the lower pasture. Too many for travelers, too organized for ranch hands. Odessa stepped beside him. Neither spoke. They already knew. Vernon had made his choice. The men reached the outer fencing just after midnight. The storm swallowed most sounds, but not all. Wood breaking, horses shifting, voices carried by the wind. Wade moved calmly, the same way he always did. He handed Isaac a rifle. "Stay inside." Isaac swallowed hard and nodded. Then Wade stepped into the blizzard. Odessa followed, not behind him, beside him. The valley disappeared beneath swirling snow. Visibility dropped to only a few yards. Lanterns danced like distant ghosts. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then new lights appeared from the opposite direction. More riders, dozens of them. Sheriff Ben Turner rode at the front. Beside him was Eli Carter. Behind them came ranchers Odessa recognized. Men who had once avoided her. Men who had stayed silent. Now they rode through the storm together. The confrontation ended almost as quickly as it began. Because fear survives only while truth remains hidden. Eli spoke. Then another witness stepped forward, an aging bookkeeper who had once worked at the bank. Then another. The ledger connected every story, every missing document, every stolen acre, every threat. Standing beneath the storm, Vernon Pike finally realized there was nowhere left to run. Sheriff Turner placed him under arrest before dawn. The blizzard continued, but somehow the valley felt lighter. Weeks later, winter slowly loosened its grip. The snow began melting from the lower fields. Water returned to the creek. For the first time in years, Odessa allowed herself to imagine a future. The investigation continued. More evidence surfaced. More families recovered land records. Silver Junction talked about little else, and for the first time, people stopped whispering when Wade Holloway entered a room. Then spring arrived, quietly, almost without warning. One morning, Odessa stood on the porch watching sunlight touch the distant mountains. The air smelled different, warmer, cleaner. The danger was gone. The mystery was solved. The agreement was fulfilled. That thought stayed with her all day. By evening, she made her decision. The marriage had been a bargain, a rescue, a partnership born from desperation. She would not remain simply because she had nowhere else to go. The next morning, she packed. 1 trunk, 2 canvas bags, nothing more. Isaac watched from the barn doorway. He looked confused, but said nothing. The wagon stood ready near the gate. Odessa placed the final bag inside. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Wade. He had not asked questions, had not argued, had not tried to stop her, until now. He stood beside the wagon, hat in hand, morning sunlight catching the gray beginning to show near his temples. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Wade looked at the luggage, looked at her, and asked quietly, "Why are you leaving home?" The words settled between them. Simple, honest. 4 words, yet somehow stronger than every speech she had ever heard. Odessa looked toward the ranch house, toward the stable, the pasture, the porch where they drank coffee before sunrise, the kitchen table where they shared quiet meals, the place where Isaac laughed again, the place where she stopped feeling alone. Home. Not shelter, not obligation. Home. Her eyes filled before she realized it. She laughed softly and wiped them away. Wade said nothing. He simply waited, the way he always had. Patient, steady, present. Odessa removed her hand from the wagon, then stepped away from it. Wade's shoulders relaxed almost invisibly. A small movement. Easy to miss. Unless you knew him. Months later, Silver Junction celebrated the Spring Harvest Festival. Music drifted through town. Children chased one another across the square. Farmers exchanged stories beside market stalls. Ruth Callahan waved from her store. Sheriff Turner tipped his hat. Even strangers greeted Odessa by name. Isaac had become one of the most trusted horsemen in the valley. The boy who once feared losing everything now carried himself like a young man building a future. Late that afternoon, Wade and Odessa rode to the ridge above town. The valley stretched beneath them. Green fields replacing winter snow. Church bells echoed across the distance. Neither hurried to fill the silence. The wind moved gently through the grass. Wade reached for her hand. No speech followed. No grand declaration. No second proposal. Just a rough rancher's hand finding hers and holding on. Odessa looked across the peaceful valley, then laced her fingers through his. This time she did not let go. Far below them, Granite Ridge Valley carried on with its ordinary life. And for the first time in many years, it finally felt like peace. Maybe that's what stayed with me most about Wade and Odessa. Not the blizzard, not the fight for the truth, not even the day an entire town finally admitted it had been wrong. It was that quiet moment on the ridge. 2 people who had arrived there carrying old wounds. 2 people who had spent so long surviving that they had almost forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. And if you're honest, maybe you've stood in a place like that yourself. Maybe you've had a season when life took more than it gave. Maybe you've wondered whether trust was worth the risk, whether opening your heart again would only lead to another loss. What this story reminds us is that healing rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it comes through a small act of kindness, a hand that stays, a promise that isn't spoken loudly, a person who chooses you again and again, even on the ordinary days. Wade and Odessa didn't build a life through grand speeches. They built it one choice at a time, one difficult day at a time, one quiet moment of faith at a time. And maybe that's what home really is. Not a place you find. A place you create with people who refuse to walk away. If this story touched you, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what moment stayed with you the most. And if you'd like to spend more evenings around stories of courage, second chances, healing, and unforgettable Western love, I hope you'll join us again. There are still many journeys waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.